the bookstore?
Mayor, we're live.
Pros and cons.
I'd like to call the Williamsburg Council meeting to order. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey. Here. Mayor Pons.
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Here.
Mr. Maslin.
Here.
Thank you. You all have in your packets the minutes from November 8th and November 10th. Is there any corrections to be made? Motion?
I move that the minutes of November the 8th and the 10th be accepted.
Second.
Mr. Rogers.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Mayor Pons.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent.
Aye.
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
And so that takes us to matters of special privilege, and today we have a good one, I think, but good for Carolyn. You want to join me at the podium?
Not so good for the city, maybe.
Oh, I have 5 minutes.
Wow.
So as you know, everybody knows probably, Carolyn is retiring at the end of this month, and exciting. We had a nice little celebration for you the other day, and today we have a nice resolution here I'd like to read. So whereas, after a long distinguished 41-year career in planning, Carolyn Murphy will retire December 31st, 2021, having effectively and honorably served the city of Williamsburg for 30 years. Whereas Carolyn was hired in 1991 as Codes Compliance Officer and subsequently served in roles in Zoning Administrator, Deputy Planning Director, and is currently serving as Planning and Codes Compliance Director. Whereas Carolyn has worked on 4 comprehensive plans, I think I worked a couple with you, and recently completed the 2021 Comprehensive Plan Update while navigating the COVID restrictions. Whereas Carolyn has admirably served as staff liaison on boards of Zoning Appeals, Architectural Review Board, Planning Commission, as well as numerous city committees and working on groups. And whereas Carolyn has served on various regional boards and commissions, including the Transportation Technical Advisory Committee, the Historic Triangle Bicycle Advisory Committee, and the Williamsburg Area Transit Authority. And whereas Carolyn was a founding member of the Williamsburg Association, the Virginia Association of Zoning Officials, and whereas during Carolyn's tenure, she has developed and strengthened many professional and personal relationships, earning the utmost respect of colleagues and citizens alike. Whereas Carolyn's successful achievements will continue beyond her retirement, affirming her legacy as a visionary leader for the Williamsburg Planning and Codes Compliance Department in the city of Williamsburg. And now, therefore, let it be resolved that the City Council of Williamsburg, on behalf of all the citizens of Williamsburg, does hereby express its sincere gratitude for Carolyn Murphy for years of leadership and service. We congratulate her upon retirement and wish her many years of happiness. So here's that document, all signed by City Council.
Thank you so much.
You're certainly welcome. Would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, I've got a couple of words to say. I was worried for a minute on these resolutions because when we do them in planning, you usually go back and have someone look at the 4 years or 5 years of service for that person. And I was thinking, good Lord, who in my department was supposed to go back and see how many planning commission, ARB, BZA meetings?
Too many to count.
Too many to count, right? So, but thank you so much, Mayor, and all members of the City Council. It's been an honor and a privilege to work for the City of Williamsburg, for not only the citizens, but all the board members, all the Planning Commission, City Council members. It has been truly a privilege in me, and I'm truly honored and humbled, and I'm not going anywhere. I hope to see you all around town, because Al and I are going to be here 7 or 8 months of the year. So thank you so much, and it's been a privilege working for the City of Williamsburg.
You're certainly welcome.
I've learned so much. Thank you.
Appreciate everything.
Yep.
Got a big smile under here. Okay, so that takes us now to public hearings. First is the proposed resolution number 21-30, appropriating the use of the Corona state and local fiscal recovery funds, allocating as part of the American Rescue Plan, transferring funds into the ARPA funds for the COVID-19 contingency and authorizing the use of funds for the premium pay of city employees. Ms. Dameron?
Thank you. The city was awarded $18.4 million in ARPA funds, which can be expended according to the Act and the United States Treasury Department's interpretation of the law. We're still operating in the Treasury's interim final rule, under which $8.9 million of ARPA funds qualify for revenue loss, which is less restrictive regulations regarding how the funds can be utilized. The process of determining the best use of funds under the current regulations began with city staff identifying projects that would serve our residents well and had the potential for return on investments that would continue to prosper the city and our residents and businesses well into the future. The list was reviewed, and any known projects, while worthwhile projects, that would not comply with the restrictions of the Act were eliminated from this consideration. A steering committee then reviewed and prioritized that list and added additional projects deemed to be a good investment for the community. Public input on the steering committee's recommendations was sought through a community survey, and the results from each stage of this process was presented to City Council at the ARPA retreat in November, along with more details on each project and the restrictions currently in the interim final report. From this information, City Council developed a flexible framework for the deployment of ARPA funds. Flexibility is key to this process for several reasons, but most notably is the timing and cost of process that's still in the planning stage, and we're also still waiting for the interim rule that governs the use of funds to be finalized, which in turn determines which project costs are eligible and will meet the reporting requirements. Resolution 2130 provides the flexibility needed and requested by City Council by appropriating the funds according to the framework developed by City Council into 4 major categories: economic resiliency projects, CIP accelerator projects, and one Williamsburg projects, and smart city technology. Appendix A to the resolution summarizes each category and lists the projects and the estimated costs under consideration in each category. In addition, this resolution also approves the transfer of $3 million of COVID-19 contingency funds from the Capital Improvement Fund to the ARPA Fund and brings the total appropriation in the ARPA Fund to $21,419,663. The total shown on the resolution for the ARPA Fund is $30,345,639, which is $8,925,976 more than the $21.4 million I just mentioned, and I want to explain the reason. The $8.9 million is the city's revenue loss for FY20 and can be used to provide governmental services in the general fund. Funds previously budgeted in the general fund can then be transferred to the ARPA fund and bear less restrictions than the remaining $9.5 million, and allows the city to accelerate worthwhile projects that otherwise may take years to achieve. Having explained the resolution that is in your packet, staff has obtained additional information regarding premium pay for city employees, and at this point I'd like to turn that over to Mr. Trevette to explain the additional information and the revised recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Dameron.
As you all know, most localities receive some portion of the ARPA funding, and one eligible expense has been premium pay. And so when the first tranche of funding came down, some localities went ahead and awarded bonuses to employees in recognition of the effort put forth during COVID. In our area, most notably, $3,000 was given to public safety employees in the counties around us, and much of that was then matched for the rest of the employees in the counties. the catalyst for that was really the fact that the governor gave a $3,000 bonus to the sheriff's employees that were funded by the comp board. So in evaluation of what we should do, we'd originally proposed a bonus program sort of similar to what we had done last year, but in light of the fact that that was increased by the $3,000 awards to the other neighboring localities, we felt like it was a good use of ARPA money to match that in the city and do it in our way. And so our recommendation is that we use premium pay funding to accomplish a bonus for all full-time employees of $3,000 and all part-time employees of $1,500. And so we have amended the resolution to reflect that higher amount to accomplish that, and that's what we'd ask you to pass today.
That concludes your remarks?
That concludes my comments. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions of staff before we go to the public hearing?
No, no, I'll wait till afterwards.
Okay. All right, having no questions, so we'll open the public hearing, which is an opportunity for any one of the masses here in the audience to come forward. Speak to this issue. Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and come back to council for comments. Vice Mayor?
So thank you, Mr. Dameron and Mr. Trivett. Obviously, there's a lot of work that went into this funding that's outlined here in the resolution, from city staff's first recommendations to the steering committee to the council staff retreat. So I think, you know, it's a number of projects here that were agreed upon and are in the best interest of the city. And most of all, I like the flexibility that we have as we move forward. And I guess one question I have in the itemized list in Appendix A, there's still going to be further discussion about those projects as they come forward. It's not, we're not approving, here's all those projects, we're going to move forward with them right now. So I think that's important for people to understand that we'll be revisiting these projects as we move forward. And also, I think it's important to understand that a lot of these projects, I think we've had some comments on it, that we can't fully fund these projects. Some of these projects we're using the ARPA funds as startup money, and they'll have to be either public-private partnerships or some other funding available to complete these projects. So that's why the numbers might not add up to folks in the public that look at it. And then on the last thing that Mr. Trivett spoke to, the employee bonuses, I think it's important as you look at other localities who provided bonuses to public safety more than other employees. I think it's important to show value to all of our employees who worked through COVID, and they all played some role in continuing to move the city forward during COVID, and I think they're all deserving. And right now, there's so many opportunities out there for employees to look elsewhere because there has been a change in workforce dynamics for many localities, and I think we should do all we can for our employees so that this doesn't become a tipping point for somebody to make a decision to leave our organization to move to another. So thank you again for all the work that went into this.
Vice Mayor, Mr. Maslin?
Yeah, thanks. And I agree with you, and that's what we had talked about early on with the uncertainty about some of the categories, that being able to take the first $8.9 million, which you've been able to document as lost revenue, be able to fund the general fund, which then gives us more flexibility in terms of some of the other projects that we don't have to go through an audit with the federal government on. And to the Vice Mayor's point, I think it's important that, especially the One Williamsburg projects, that we have a system where staff comes to us with the project description and what's the game plan for those projects, so we can all buy into them before we're spending a lot of time on them. And one of them that comes to mind is the solar projects. Somebody said, well, we'll put solar panels on every building. Well, I'm not sure that's the right answer, but if we're designing a new police facility, that would be appropriate to see, can we design that into the police facility, and also gives us an opportunity to get the input from the Architectural Review Board, so everybody's on board with that. And maybe that line item becomes more sustainability projects. So in addition to solar projects, there are other projects that we can see that would help us move forward on our sustainability initiatives. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And I would just like to echo particularly Vice Mayor Dent's comments about the premium pay and the flexibility. I think it's especially noteworthy that a finance director who's usually very straight and narrow numbers person has sort of broadened to allow the flexibility in the way that these funds have been sort of earmarked and approached. I also want to give kudos to the entire city staff for the approach taken for the use with ARPA funds. I think we're a little unique in getting public comment and our stakeholder comments and buy-in from all of us on city council. So I think it was a very good exercise, a great exercise to determine the best use of this money. And I think, again, echoing Vice Mayor Dent as far as the premium pay, I think with our organization, it really is the best use to give everyone that bonus, and it's the intent of ARPA to have the premium pay and to recognize everyone who worked extra hard during that time period. So thank you for all you've done.
Build on that uniqueness, it's great to be in the position now in December to do some of this appropriations. For those that maybe are following along from home or remember today in this room, it was around the June and July time frame that we were getting a better idea, as we were joking, the interim final guidance about what ARPA funding could be used for and exactly how much it might be. So months down the line now, we really have had multiple opportunities for stakeholders within the Williamsburg community and an entirely public process to comment on the allocation of some of these funds. And as the Vice Mayor noted, there will be opportunities going forward to comment on that as well. And I think that's really an incredible thing that we as a city did, not necessarily just we as a council, but something that was staff driven and bringing together a lot of people from representative of institutions here in the city, and then also allowing anyone to comment on the usage of some of this money, given that other localities may have different needs than Williamsburg and might have decided to make some of those decisions more around regular infrastructure needs rather than really trying to, as we did, think about tomorrow, Williamsburg 2040, really positioning ourselves with some of the projects we've outlined here on transformational change. So I'm excited to have done that and to support the appropriation of funds as is, and that includes the premium pay for staff. I know how in the last 2 years, things really have changed so much, and I'm glad that we are in a position to be able to recognize all members of our city staff. Certainly know that our first responders are always willing to be the first on the scenes and work hard every day, but I think that's something that every member of all departments do as well, both full-time and part-time employees. So excited to support both the premium pay and as a part of the ARPA funding.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so I think, developing this document is part of the strategy of building the plan, which is a requirement of ARPA funds. We need to kind of set the course of how we want to spend these funds. And I want to commend all of council and certainly the folks that worked on the task force to help us identify some projects that make investment in our futures that will pay dividends long term versus, as we've been saying, just paying off credit card debts and not having those funds really do anything for us. So I think we're on the right path. The plan that we've laid out here and staff has been able to put together provides us the flexibility to make decisions moving forward. This is by no means the end of the game. There's a lot of work to be done. As Vice Mayor Dent pointed out, there are projects on here that will cost more than the ARPA funds will pay for, and so this is a strategic opportunity for us to develop relationships, public-private relationships, to get these projects done. And so I think Williamsburg is a great place to make investments, and I think by making this announcement, we'll see those opportunities present themselves. And I think we've got a good strategic plan here, and certainly do. So I support what we've drafted here, but also support the premium pay for city employees. It's been it's been a tough 2 years. You know, these ARPA funds, allow for this type of use because, the federal government recognized the amount of work and effort that all municipal workers have had to put forward to get through this challenging times, and certainly not over. I hope that there's more funds to come from the federal government, so maybe next year there'll be a bonus as well, but we won't hold our breath on that. But so I support this as well. So if there's no other comments, is there a motion?
So I move that City Council adopt Resolution 21-30 as amended, appropriating $18,419,633 of the ARPA fiscal recovery revenue, appropriating $14.4 million for economic resiliency projects, $2 million for CIP accelerator projects, $1.2 million for one Williamsburg projects, transferring $3 million from the COVID-19 contingency, appropriating $1.5 million for Smart City Technology Project, and authorizing the use of ARPA funds for premium pay for city employees, because I believe that was what the amendment was in the resolution.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
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 Good, thank you very much. So that takes us to item B, consideration and approval of the proposed resolution 21-31, accepting and appropriating the Municipal Utility Assistance Grant from the state's ARPA allocation. Ms. Dameron again.
Thank you. The Commonwealth of Virginia has provided each locality a portion of the state's ARPA funds as municipal utility relief for residential customers with accounts over 60 days delinquent as of August 31st, 2021. The city has been awarded $51,884. We have qualified so that there's no application process. This will be distributed among those accounts in December. And so we ask that council accept these funds and approve the appropriation for municipal use for residential customers.
Are there any questions for Ms. Dameron before we go to the public hearing?
We can go to the public hearing first.
Okay. So with that, we'll open the public hearing. Anybody like to come forward and speak to this? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and come back for questions. Rogers?
A clarification for the 51,000, no application process. You said it would be dispersed amongst those.
With delinquent accounts over 60 days as of the August 31st, 2021.
Okay.
And we'll have to do that proportionately so that it's evenly throughout those accounts that qualify. But there was a formula as part of the certification process that we had to provide information for that allowed us to meet the criteria necessary so that we didn't have to have an application and a certification for each awardee.
How will those with delinquent accounts be notified that their debt drawn down from this funding?
We will draft a letter that sends out and explains the process and how much that they have been granted an award. And then that will be reflective on their next billing cycle.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Ms. Dameron, do you have a estimate on how many accounts that might be involved in that?
We do have that. I don't remember off the top of my head. I can make that, distribute that information after the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Is this in addition to other programs Human Services may have been administering on a regular basis?
This is a separate program, so it would be in addition to assistance that would be offered through the Public Assistance Fund. Yes.
And so we have other programs that have been ongoing, right?
We have had other programs that did assist, that's correct, and I'm sure we'll have some moving forward.
Thank you.
Quick question. So the 51,000 probably does that meet the threshold of what we have in delinquency, or will we still have a balance in the delinquency?
We would still have some delinquencies, because this is only for residents, and it's not going to be enough to cover all of those, but it certainly will help.
Okay, good. All right. Your motion?
So I move that City Council adopt Resolution 21-31 to amend the ARPA and utility funds for the Municipal Utility Assistance Grant Program.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons? Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay. Takes us to item C, consideration of resolution number 21-32, authorizing the assignment of $300,100 of the FY21 Williamsburg and James City County surplus to the pre-K kindergarten school design and $94,373 to the Educational Stabilization Reserve and amending the FY22 General Fund and Capital Improvement Program budgets. Dameron again.
Just to give a little bit of background, the Williamsburg James City County School System had an FY21 surplus of about $9 million, of which $863,208 was the city's share of that surplus. Last month, City Council appropriated $382,415 to fund the city's share of the school board's year-end spending plan. And now we're coming back and asking of the $480,793 that remains, 10% of that or $86,320 will remain in the general fund and available for future appropriation at City Council's discretion. But we are asking that $300,100 be appropriated for the pre-kindergarten school design and $94,373 to be appropriated for the Education Stabilization Reserve that will provide funding for future school capital improvement projects. So staff's recommendation that council would approve this resolution appropriating those funds.
So this is not new dollars. These are dollars that were coming back from the school division, as you outlined. And whereas we had previously, we're going to set aside that $400,000+ to go into the stabilization fund, we're just advancing that $300,100 to this budget year for that design.
Right, to move it up
Gotcha. Thank you.
in the current year.
Questions?
No, just, is this still a public hearing?
Yeah, no,
No-
yes,
no-
this is a
no
public hearing.
questions.
This is comments or questions for staff, and then I'll go into public
No
hearing.
questions?
No questions.
Okay, so I'll open the public hearing, and don't see anybody new in the audience, so I'll close that public hearing and come back for questions.
No comments?
Questions, comments, speak your
So
mind.
I don't have any questions, but first of all, I'd like to say that we value our relationship with the school board and the James City County Board of Supervisors. Also realizing that this has been an ongoing discussion long before I was on city council about this debate over space for pre-K or elementary education, and realizing that we are the minority partner in this agreement, and realizing the school board wants to move forward with something because these discussions have been ongoing to address the need for pre-K. You know, personally, looking at the presentations that we had from consultants, the information that was provided at our joint school board meeting last week, I personally believe that an elementary school would have been the best option. I do believe that the enrollment projections for elementary is going to advance quicker than maybe even the consultant provided that provided information to us on enrollment projections. And an elementary school would address pre-K space and elementary education. My fear is that we're investing in 2 pre-K buildings, and then that elementary school there's going to be a necessity for that elementary school much sooner than 7 or 8 years out, and then we're going to be faced with another huge funding project for an elementary school. I do believe that the growth will demand an elementary school, and as some of the comments that were made at our school board meeting, even if the growth doesn't reach those peaks, maybe we have the opportunity to reduce the student-teacher ratio that's in the classroom right now to advance education for the children in our school system. So I do believe that elementary school is going to be a necessity much sooner than required. But I do understand the school board's need to move forward with something to address the pre-K issue. So that's my personal feelings about elementary versus pre-K.
Madison?
Yeah, I support this. I think that the more we can do to bring additional capacity online for both pre-K and elementary students, the better. And I think this path forward is going to do that, especially if we're going to be able to jumpstart it with design right away. So I'm in agreement with this. Thank you.
Ms. Ramsey?
And I, having served with Vice Mayor Dent on the school liaison board, I think we have a little insight into particularly the capacity numbers, and definitely understand that all of the elementary schools are at capacity, with all but Matoka having trailers to meet those needs. And I also agree too that with the projections, by the time the pre-K is completed planning and construction, it'll probably be time to start for the planning and design for an elementary school. So it could end up costing more. It's likely to cost more, but the decision may not be perfect that has been made by the school board and board of supervisors, and it will at least help alleviate some of the space concerns that they have now. So support going ahead and allocating money for the design.
And as do I mentioned in our school board meeting last Friday that there's constrictions at both the elementary school and the pre-K level. So either way, you're solving a piece of that. I think what we had heard last month from ANLAR after their discussion was that it made more sense to go forward with an elementary school rather than a pre-K, and there were reasons to that, one of which being the location of that facility. So I'm hopeful that with this decision, the school board, the ability to fund 2 wings rather than 1 central location, maybe the extra students who aren't able to do CDR or Bright Beginnings can be a part of those classrooms. But similarly, as the vice mayor said, it was 5 years, FY27 at moderate projections, in which it would be overpopulated, and I'm sorry, it was 5 years at high projections, 8 years at moderate projections. So point being, it's coming either way, that at the elementary school level, there's going to be an extra squeeze. But ANLAR also showed that there were students in the pre-K level that weren't able to be well served. So like it's been said, we are sort of small fish in the funding, at least, or the small fish. Happy to support the design of this building.
Well, thank you. I appreciate everyone's comments, and I share those. I think it's penny wise and dollar foolish. We are just a small component of the funding mechanism. I would agree with the vice mayor that building an elementary school today would solve a capacity issue well beyond 7 or 8 years from now, whereas just building the wings will only solve a capacity in the short term, but will meet the needs of the pre-K students, of which there's more than 150 people on a waiting list. And so it's something that needs to be done. Obviously it saves some money in the short run to build the wings. It was said at the recent school board meeting by someone that the city wanted the elementary school because somehow that saved us money, and that was just really erroneous, and sorry that was said, because it's not true. We all want what's best for our students, the children in this community, and we feel that, clearly I think we all feel that an elementary school is the best path forward. But be that as it may, the funding's not going to be there for an elementary school, but for these additions to two of the existing elementary to create some space. So
I think we modify this, that City Council approve Resolution 21-32, authorizing the assignment of $300,100 of FY21 Williamsburg and JCC school surplus to the pre-kindergarten school design and $94,373 to the Education Stabilization Reserve, and amend the FY 2022 General Fund and Capital Improvement Program budgets.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Thank you. So that takes us to reports. We have our November 21 financial reports. Ms. Dameron, anything you'd like to share?
I'd like to start with the COVID recovery because that gives us an indication of how well our major revenue streams are coming in. On this report, if you look in column G, bottom line, you see that we are about $2 million ahead of where we projected to be in November. And then looking at each category with real estate tax, which includes current collections for the real estate levy and public service real estate tax collections. The variances and timing differences from the cash flow model used for the projections to the actual results. A good example of this is public service real estate taxes were received in November, while the model anticipated receipt in December. Just that one timing difference accounts for about $123,000 of the total variance from the projection of $648,000. Personal property taxes are trailing the projection by $218,000 at this point. I think that's also some timing differences with the projection. Last year, by December 6th, the city had collected 69% of the total revenues received for personal property. This year, on December 6th, we received 74% of the budgeted revenues. The business, professional, and occupational license tax is more in line with the projection, with just a small variance of $516,000, but then those taxes aren't due until March. The lodging tax has a positive variance of $593,000 compared to the projection, and is about $55,000 more than the taxes collected in November of 2018 or for fiscal year 2019, which is column B, and prior to the pandemic. And it's $824,000 more than was collected year-to-date in November of 2020 or last year. Meals tax has a positive variance compared to the projection of $748,000, and compared to November of 2018, collections are $173,000 more, and have exceeded last year's collection by $899,000. Sales tax are ahead of the projection by $150,000 and slightly exceed the November fiscal 19 collections by about $40,000 and last year's collections by $248,000. Just a reminder, where we're on sales tax, we had collected about $300,000 that needs to be redistributed, and starting in December, they're going to take a third of that, or close about $100,000 each month from our collections to be redistributed. The tourism sales tax is in line with the projection, and the FY19 collections and exceeds last year's collections by $45,000. The $2 lodging tax is also ahead of the projection by about $73,000, but is trailing FY19 collections by about $56,000. However, the collections are ahead of last year by $156,000. Other general fund revenues are in line with the budget at this point. It's just interesting to note that if you take the FY21 revenues year to date as of November, and back out the CARES revenue and the sales tax for education, and compare that to the FY22 revenues year-to-date as of November. The FY22 revenues are about 2.8 million more at this point. The general fund FY22 expenditures are also in line with budget at this point. The utility fund is seeing improvement in revenues. Revenues increased as of November 22% compared to last year, and primarily this increase is due to the water revenue and is related primarily to increased consumption, with the majority of that increase in commercial. Expenditures are in line with budget. However, sewer expenditures are about 15% higher compared to last year, and the majority of this increase is due to the pass-through of sewer revenue or increased sewer revenue to the Hampton Roads Sanitation District. I think these are very promising results as of November. We will continue to monitor revenues and expenditures. And I think with expenditures, one thing that I will be watching for impacts due to the increased cost that we're seeing in the marketplace, and especially in terms of items that are needed for essential services, and maybe at times a little bit harder to cut back on. But that concludes my formal report. Glad to entertain any questions.
Questions?
Yeah, on the personal property tax, I'm glad to see that that's improved dramatically from the report last month, which we thought was maybe a timing issue. So what we're not seeing in there is the due date is December 1, right?
Right.
So we got 1 day and maybe some delinquent collections. So this is looking a lot better than last month. Concerning the sales tax, the budget, FY22 budget, $4.4 million. Approximately how much of that is from grocery sales tax? Because, you know, we want to keep an eye on that depending on what's happening in Richmond for the next year.
Off the top of my head, I don't know. That's something that I'll have to work in conjunction with Ms. Overy, our Commissioner of Revenue, who receives those reports. I'm sure that we will be getting requests from the state for, or I would hope that we would, for the impact on local governments.
Thank you.
No questions.
I have none either. Thank you, Director Dameron.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate the report. Monthly departmental operating reports. Anything to add there, Mr. Privet?
Only that, I think we talked about this at the work session, but this entire process of providing you the monthly operating reports and their content will be revised next month, we hope, and we'll be going through that in great detail at the work session with you. This month, we did run into some technological snags in terms of the reporting for the parking garage. There was an error with collection of data from New Park, so if you look at that data, it shows 0 collected. I think we've resolved that, but we got it too late to update the report, so we'll get that in there as soon as possible. And again, next month, this will all be revised and hopefully be a much better format.
Any questions?
So, Mark, looking forward to next month. It should be great. Thank you.
Mr. Privet, City Manager report, anything?
None today.
Shelton?
Nothing today.
Okay. Any unfinished business to come before council? Okay. We have 2 items under new business. First is the presentation and acceptance of the annual comprehensive financial report for the year end June 30th, 2021. We have Ms. Wall here with the auditing firm for the last time. Here for the last time.
Exactly. I am retiring at the end of December, so this will be my last presentation to City Council. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm Ann Wall. I'm a partner in the Richmond office of Robinson Farmer Cox Associates. I was here during our preliminary field work. We continued to work on site with staff for the interim field work and the final field work I believe in September for a week. We had a team here. We probably emailed a little more than we did go visit even when we were on site, but we did have to make certain inquiries and deal in person with finance staff. But it's my pleasure to report the results of the FY21 audit. Local governments are required to have an audit each year. Every county, city, and town with a population greater than 3,500 is required to have an annual audit by an independent audit firm. It's required by the state code. Local government audits are really subject to a lot of regulation, and there's a lot of standards that govern the work that we do. There's governmental auditing standards, there's governmental accounting standards, there's this audit specifications that are issued for counties, cities, and towns by the Virginia Auditor of Public Accounts. The Single Audit Act amendments of 1996 and the provisions of a uniform guidance, both of those are issued by the OMB and govern the federal program dollars. So all of those regulations really, and those standards affect the field work that we perform, the inquiries that we make, the presentation of this report. It's really rather lengthy at this point, but again, everything that's in the report is a required element. These standards govern the federal programs that we audit. As you can imagine, this year, the CRF money, the CARES Act money, was certainly the highest dollar level funding that the city received, and that's what got our audit attention this year due to the size. Those regulations, there was one new accounting standard that was effective this year. It was accounting standard number 84. You can kind of see that in our auditor's opinion. We make reference to that. But it really was related to the reporting of the fiduciary funds, which are really just custodial in nature. I'm pleased to report that we didn't have any difficulties or disagreements with management over the course of the audit. We did propose some audit adjusting entries at the conclusion of our audit, and those have been posted to the accounting system. So the city's financial reports agree to the fund statements that you have as part of the audit document. Just as a matter of reference, I wanted to point out that there are, this report is full of numbers, and there's a lot of actual numbers, but there's budget numbers. There are some estimates in here as well. Certain things are accounting estimates. There's an allowance for uncollectibles related to taxes, the useful lives of capital assets, depreciation expense, all of the pension and OPEB liability information that actuaries produce that are required to be included within this report. Those are all estimated numbers. At the conclusion of the audit, we did get representations from management, from the city attorney. There's certain elements of this report that were drafted in-house. There's a management's discussion and analysis that is drafted after we've drafted the report. Ms. Dameron prepared that, and it really is an analytical comparison of this year to last year, and it's a required element. There are statistical schedules in the back that are unaudited as well, that are prepared in-house in a transmittal letter. Now on to the results of the audit. I'm pleased to report to you that we were able to express a clean, unmodified opinion on the financial statements and issue clean, unmodified opinions or reports on compliance under federal programs. And then there's also an opinion that's required related to our review of internal controls. And again, those opinions were clean, and they were based on the substantive work that we did reviewing the financial statements, reviewing and testing internal controls, and reviewing and testing federal programs. We did issue a management letter this year. It really only had, I think it just had 2 items on it this year, and the management letter generally is based on the internal control work that we do. And we discussed this in fairly decent level of detail with the Audit and Finance Committee. The 2 comments, one was related to improving the documentation over the approval of public assistance fund payments. And the other comment really was related to the cross-training in the Finance Department. And that's something that the Finance Department's been working on for probably the last several years, because it's pretty extensive with a small department to be able to establish someone to back up and to know the critical functions of the Finance Department. Ms. Dameron had issued a written corrective action plan of what her plan is as she moves forward to address both of those areas. The city's financial report and the comparative cost report forms will be submitted to the Auditor of Public Accounts by the statutory deadline. It's next week, it's December 15th. This report will also be submitted to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. That's related to the federal program dollars that the city receives, and that's an online submission. I'll work with Ms. Dameron on that to get that accomplished. And then at the conclusion of this presentation, the city is required to report to the Auditor of Public Accounts to prepare a notarized statement that's probably signed by the city, by the mayor, that the results of the audit have been presented in a public session to City Council. If I were to draw your attention to anything in the report, I know Ms. Dameron's probably going to go through some of the numbers in here, but there is a fairly detailed footnote on COVID-19 and subsequent events. That's footnote 20. There's a footnote on that new governmental accounting standards. The MD&A, that's a good read. And then Exhibit 12 on page 81, that's the actual versus budget report for the general fund. And so kind of if you take a look back and you remember when you would have been preparing, it has the original budget, the amended budget, and then the actual numbers. And you think back when the city was preparing the FY21 budget, that would have been the beginning of COVID back in March, April, May of 2020. And so that budget was very conservative. It actually, the plan was to use $3.2 million of fund balance. And at the end of the year, the city actually added to general fund balance by $1.1 million. And certainly a lot of decisions went into making that happen. In terms of revenues ended up coming in better than expected, but the expenditures and those were guarded, and some of those were cut back to make that happen. And then the final thing I'd refer you to is the schedule of expenditures of federal assistance. That's at the back of the report on pages 140 through 142, but it's where you can see the federal program dollars that the city expended for this year. It was $4.3 million. And that's compared to, I looked back last year for FY20, it was $1.2 million, and then the year before that it was $1.0 million. So again, those CRF money, and then as you move forward, the ARPA money is, compared to the federal funding that the city has received before, is extensive. And then as you move forward, those are also the federal programs that'll get selected for audit, certainly by your external auditors, but they're also subject to a federal compliance audit by the federal government. So this year we did look at the CRF funding, and we didn't have any findings to report. We worked with Ms. Dameron on that. And if you kind of think about it, this was your first year to expend those funds, but this, as your auditors, this was a new program. It was our first year to audit compliance with those funds as well. And the feds were fairly slow in getting the information that we needed out to do what we needed to do. And but I believe we got it right. So, I mean, as you move forward with the ARPA money, I would keep that in mind, that that's subject to audit and review as well. So that concludes my comments.
Well, thank you, Ms. Wall. And Ms. Dameron, I apologize. I should have gone to you first to introduce Ms. Walls. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I do have a presentation. It
Yes,
just
I'm
gives
sorry.
a high-level overview, and I was going to recommend that we have Ms. Wall present the audit findings. So she's also brought printed reports for City Council that we will distribute after the meeting. But if you're ready, I'll be glad
Yes,
to
ma'am.
do
And
my...
again, I apologize for skipping over you.
And so this is a summary of how we ended the year. The first slide is a high-level view of how the city finished FY21. We had revenues of about $38.1 million, and it's important to note that those revenues include about $2.8 million in CARES funding that was expended during the year and matched revenue to those expenditures. Our expenditures were $35.7 million. And then it's important to realize that we had a $2.5 million transfer from the tourism fund that was planned and slightly below actually what we had budgeted for that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. The transfers out there of $3.7 million include the $2.2 million that the city transfers to the tourism fund, part of which fulfills the city's maintenance of effort required by Senate Bill 942. It also includes $1.4 million, which is the city's support of the Public Assistance Fund, and includes the pass-through of almost $300,000 in the Williamsburg Health Foundation grant that was expended this year, and those revenues match that expenditure, and $113,609 of transfer of CARES funding to the Public Assistance Fund and the Utility Fund. We ended FY21 with a fund balance of $14.8 million, or 38.9% of operating revenues. And then we talked a little bit earlier about the school's year-end surplus and their spending plan, which was appropriated in the current year. But when you adjust for that appropriation, that would leave about $14 million in fund balance, or 36.9% of operating revenues, which is just slightly above 35%, and was planned because of the uncertainties as we were developing the current year's budget. It's hard to imagine what unassigned fund balance would be without the CARES funding and the transfer from tourism, because we would have had to make some very different and some very challenging choices. However, it's not unreasonable to suggest that unassigned fund balance without those revenues may have been as low as $9.4 million, or about 26.8% of adjusted operating revenues. On slide 2, we're looking at the general fund revenues and transfers. And really what I want to focus in is that revenues and transfers exceeded the budgeted revenues by about $3 million and exceeded the FY20 revenues and transfers by about $4.9 million. Variances from the budget most often reflect the uncertainties surrounding COVID-19 and how the resulting restrictions would impact the economy and people's ability to pay. And also was the unknowns in preparing the budget, especially given that at the time we were preparing it, or at least the proposed budget, we weren't aware of the CARES funding. And even later in the budget process, as we became aware of the CARES funding, there were some uncertainties surrounding that. So to use an old cliche, we were hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. Not quite ready to move forward there. General fund taxes exceeded the budget by $2.8 million, and that was due to conservative budget and was $573,000 more than FY20. With real estate exceeding last year's collections by $408,000, including current and delinquent collections, and personal property exceeding last year by $114,000. With the remaining $51,000 increase from public service taxes, penalties, and interest. Other local taxes exceeded the budget by $214,000, primarily due to conservative budgets for business, professional, and occupational license, meals, recordation, and bank stock taxes. These 4 taxes were over budget by $777,000, and this positive variance was offset by the lodging tax falling under budget by $589,000. However, other local taxes were less than FY20 revenues by about $1 million, resulting primarily from a decrease in business, professional, and occupational license revenue of $404,000, and lodging of $535,000 compared to the previous year. Permits were in line with budget, but $261,000 less than FY20, primarily due to a decrease in building permits and to a lesser extent decreases in electrical and plumbing permits. Charges for services compared to FY20 decreased by $106,000 due to a decrease in EMS charges of $171,000, which I think was linked to people not wanting to expose themselves to other medical care during COVID-19. And that was offset by an increase in other charges for services, the majority of which was for Parks and Recreation. And Parks and Recreation charges tell an interesting story because the increase in Waller meal fees and revenue exceeded the loss of revenue from athletics and classes by about $55,000 as folks welcomed the and utilized outdoor activities during COVID. The $91,000 increase in miscellaneous revenue as compared to FY20 is attributed to a $30,000 an additional school surplus returned to the city, exceeding the amount estimated at the end of FY20. And also contributing to the increase was $36,700 in the Williamsburg Health Foundation grant that was received and expended during FY21, an $18,000 increase from payment in lieu of taxes. The increase in recovered costs compared to FY20 is primarily from the increased utility fund overhead charges to pay for general government administrative services such as human resources, finance, city manager's office, and the city attorney. Revenue from the state exceeded the budget due to increases in 599 funds, street and sidewalk funds, and also skill gain tax that was allocated and apparently redistributed because, as you know, we were not anticipating to receive any skill gain tax in FY21. These increases were offset by a communication tax that was under budget by $71,000. The increase of state revenue compared to FY20 was primarily due to increased sales tax for education received and passed through to the schools, less the decrease in communication tax of $67,000 compared to FY20. And then the increase in federal revenue compared to FY20 is primarily the CARES funds that we received. And then this next slide, we cover significant highlights and variances for general fund expenditures. And I'm going to primarily focus on the variances to FY20. And the reason for covering just the highlights and limiting the comparison of budget variances is because the budget variances due to the budget are primarily due to the CARES funds that had to be allocated to expenditure classifications, both in terms of the expenditure and the budget. And if you look, that total variance is pretty close to the CARES funding that we received. However, realizing that, it's also a good point to follow suit with Ms. Wall to stress that the information presented here today should be viewed in conjunction with the annual comprehensive financial report to include the financial statements, the notes to the financial statements, the transmittal letter, and the management discussion and analysis, which we refer to as MD&A. The transmittal letter is at the beginning of the report and begins with Roman numeral 1. But of particular interest, at least in regards to this conversation in the transmittal, is the economic condition and outlook section beginning on page 3. The MD&A begins on page 4 with the discussion regarding the fund statements beginning on page 12. And also very helpful are Schedules 1 and Schedule 2 that begin on pages 101 and 106 of the report. Schedule 1 compares actual revenues to budget, and Schedule 2 compares actual expenditures to budget. But with that said, an example of how CARES funding impacts the budget variances is in the General Government Administration. And of the $524,000 in that category that performed under budget, $331,000 of the variance stems from CARES funding and the budget distribution of that funding. The other $184,000 is not related to CARES and is primarily the result of the City Manager's Office, Human Resources, the Electoral Board, and the Registrar's Offices performing under budget, and areas such as travel and training, salary and benefits, voting maintenance, and also for our Quest training, which is a new employee orientation training that was difficult to provide during COVID and consideration of employee safety. The variance to FY20 of $864,000 is composed of $440,000 in CARES allocation, a $263,000 increase in salary and benefits, which includes the cost of living increase offset by vacancy savings, $43,000 in additional credit card expenses. Part of that was as we were trying to continue to receive payments while working remotely, and $50,000 in professional services and maintenance service agreements. In public safety, of the $595,000 variance compared to FY20, $444,000 is related to CARES, with the remaining $151,000 due primarily an increase in CARES fund expended of $125,000, offset by a reduction in public assistant funding of $35,000. The $584,000 increase in education for FY21 compared to 20 is comprised of three components. $287,000 in CARES funding that the city shared with the school system, $229,000 increase in sales tax for education that was passed through, and $68,000 increase in the city's share of operating cost. Parks, recreation, and cultural saw $173,000 increase compared to FY20, and is due to $87,000 in CARES expenditure and $86,000 in salary and benefits and maintenance service contracts. This category was under budget by $262,000, which was comprised of $85,000 in professional services, $77,000 in salary and benefits, and $52,000 in CARES funding, $49,000 in various other expenditures such as electricity and maintenance service contracts. Community development expenditures increased $408,000 compared to FY20. Most of this increase was composed of $539,000 increase in CARES funding, offset by $113,000 decrease in expenditures for tax incentives, which is basically a sharing of revenues under a performance agreement in which investments in the city increase the city's revenue stream, and we share a portion of that with the investor. And then as we move to the next slide, we begin to look at the utility revenues, which were about $300,000 under budget and $56,000 more than FY20. The $300,000 under budget occurred due to lower water consumption, which decreased 3.7% compared to the previous year, and also to some delinquent accounts. This decrease was offset by tap and availability fees exceeding budget by $205,000 and by $121,500 received in miscellaneous revenue that was received as a result of the Crossroads lease cancellation. The $56,000 increase in revenue compared to FY20 is primarily due to the $121,000 from the Crossroad lease cancellation, an increase in sewer revenue, which was offset by $122,000 decrease in water revenue. And then on the next slide, we begin to look at the expenditures in the utility fund. Administration expenses were in line with the budget and about $293,000 more than last year due to the increase of $186,000 in overhead charges to pay the general fund for services. Utility cares funds of $72,000 and an increase in the recording of pension liability of $28,000. Expenses for the filter plant were under budget by $82,000, the majority of which were for York County taxes that were budgeted, but were not required to pay based on our income and our agreement with York County. The $69,000 increase in the filter plant expenses compared to FY20 is primarily due to the increase in the pension liability that was recorded. The water system expenses were $76,000 under budget, with $43,000 due to salaries and related benefits and $33,000 due to operating supplies, rental of equipment, gas, and oil. Compared to last year, expenses decreased $31,000 as a result of lower expenses for professional services, travel, training, and operating supplies. Sewer system expenses were under budget by $76,000, with the majority in salaries and benefit, and to a lesser extent for supplies and rental of equipment. Expenses were $149,000 less than last year, with $112,000 due to lower sewer revenue collected for Hampton Roads Sanitation District and $32,000 in salary and benefits. And then expenses for capital projects that remain unexpended will carry forward to FY22, and the decrease in the interest expense is a result of a change in the allocation of interest on bonded debt between the general fund and the utility fund that was not reflected in the budget. Working capital for FY21 is $8.6 million and is $3.4 million than the target working capital of $5.2 million that's required by the city policy. And just a reminder that about $1 million of that will be used to purchase surplus property in the current year to purchase land that's for the protection of our water supply. And then the next slide, we look at our tourism fund. The $2 lodging tax was under budget by $118,000 and was $130,000 less than last year, where sales tax was in line with the budget and with last year with very small variances. Administrative expenses were under budget by $101,000, primarily due to reduced spending for professional services, and the $24,000 increase compared to FY20 is basically in salary and benefits. Tourism marketing decrease of $59,000 compared to the budget and $65,000 compared to last year, both the result of lower $2 room tax revenue being sent to the state for distribution to the Tourism Alliance. The tourism grant program was under budget by $180,000, and this was primarily due to the contingency grant awards that were not made. The increase of $141,000 compared to FY20 is for increased funding for Culture Fix and also for Williamsburg Live and the Global Film Festival that were not funded in FY20 and was offset by the decrease in funding for contingency grants. Tourism grant awards were suspended during the pandemic. However, previously awarded grants were honored. Of the approximately $1.4 million in outstanding awards, $228,000 was expended in FY21, and the remaining $1.1 million will carry forward to FY22 and that you can see that under reserves for awards under the actual column, about the fourth or third number up from the bottom. The $216,000 increase compared to FY20 reflects increased spending in FY21 toward the grant awards for the Kiwanis Park Fourth Field, wayfinding signs, and the sports complex. Tourism resiliency projects were completed in FY21 within the remaining budget of $146,000. These projects begin in FY20 with expenditures of $81,000 and concluded in FY21 with total expenditures of $227,000. The $2.5 million was transferred from the tourism fund to the general fund to maintain the city's fund balance policy as we recover from the pandemic. And then $165,000 was transferred to capital improvement fund in support of the public art program. The transfer to the general fund was $599,000 less than budgeted. Expenditures exceeded revenues by $1.2 million, which was about $2 million less than budgeted. After the reserve for grant awards and the budgeted use of fund balance in the current year, $1.4 million remains in fund balance. And then this slide looks at our sales tax and interest income. The sales tax was just slightly less than budgeted by about $49,000. And just slightly more than what we received in the previous year. Interest income was under budget by $120,000 and less than FY20 by $521,000. And then we take a look at our pension plan. The pension liability increased $2.4 million, where the planned fiduciary net position decreased $1.5 million, resulting in a net pension liability increase of $3.8 million, for a net liability of $15.2 million. The pension plan's net position as a percent of total pension liability is 80.1%, and that is a decrease compared to last year. We were at 84.7%. But I will say, that most experts consider anything 80% or above the sweet spot. We also take a look at the group life insurance, which is an other post-employment benefit. The group life insurance OPEB total liability increased $134,000. The plan's fiduciary net position increased $92,000, resulting in a group life insurance net OPEB liability increase of $42,000, or a net liability of $1.7 million. The plan's fiduciary net position as percent of the total group life insurance OPEB liability is 52.64%, and basically level. Last year we were at 52%. And then we take a look at the line of duty OPEB liability, which increased $62,000, while the plan's fiduciary net position increased $1,494, resulting in an increase in the LODA net OPEB liability of $60,000 for a total net liability of $419,000. The plan's fiduciary position as a percent of total line of duty act OPEB liability is at 1.02%, up from the 0.79% that we realized last year. And that concludes my formal comments. I'll be glad to entertain questions, comments.
Certainly a lot of information in there. I'll let you jump in first.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. Thank you, Ms. Dameron, for the detailed report, and Ms. Wall. And most of all, thank you and the finance staff for your your everyday work that keeps the city in compliance with all the many standards that are out there. As the mayor already alluded to, there's a ton of information in the report, and appreciate you hitting the highlights and directing us to some certain pages that would be beneficial to us.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Barbara, for all the work you've done this past year and your staff, especially with all the additional accounting required for all the federal funds and getting ready for any audits of those. Thinking back the last year, there were several things that came up. Could you give us an update on, I think there was a recommendation for an additional position in finance, and,
Right.
and what was the reason for that and how that's helped you? And then also, we were transitioning into financial systems. If you could give us an update on that.
Absolutely, I'd be glad to do that. The recommendation is that we may need additional staff, and we were very fortunate to be able to add to that. We now have a budget director, Alice Kelly, and that has been just a great asset. Now, that's not to say we have a great staff in finance. Everybody's doing a wonderful job, but you can only do so much, and we need it to cross-train. So that position, and particularly with CARES and the ARPA funding and just the additional research, has been welcome, and we are making waves in gradually getting some of our positions cross-trained, and we'll be continuing in that direction moving forward, which is important because any time that you have, for any reason that somebody is out, having familiarity. And one of the things that we'll also be doing as we do that is making sure that we have everything well documented. Just because that's always helpful, particularly if it's not something that's part of your routine duties.
And then what about the financial systems? Are we through
Yes,
that?
we have implemented, finished implementing the new financial systems with the exception of project accounting. However, we will be upgrading our systems, and I think it's the 14th and 15th of next week that we actually won't have access to the systems as we get ready for the upgrade. And of course, a part of that is, first of all, my staff has worked very hard because there's a lot of testing that has to occur before we're ready to turn that switch. And then on the back end of that, we have to be particularly cautious to make sure that all the internal controls that we know we had in place before are still in place and functioning properly.
And then what about legacy information? How do you keep that, and for how long do you need to keep it?
Sure. So right now with the upgrade, we're all on the existing system. For some time, Mark, was it HMS? Was it, and we kept some of that available should we have to go back and refer to that. We also transferred some degree, a couple of years of history over, so that we have that, maybe not in detail, but at a high-level summary in the current system without having to go back and dig through old files or through an old system.
Thank you.
Thank you for your report. I don't have any questions. I think the detail of information you provided just indicates to everyone how complex keeping track of all the different funds, revenue, expenditures is. So I really appreciate all the hard work that you and your staff have done. Thank you.
I echo that sentiment too, Director Dameron. Thank you, Ms. Wall, as well, for coming to present to us today. Certainly a great deal of detail in the report, but nice to know that we have such dedicated city servants that are keeping an eye on it. I have no further comments except to say that the point was well taken about the need for cross-training within the finance department, as clearly a lot goes into that work, and we want to make sure that should there be a sickness or a vacancy, that other members of your team can fill in temporarily. We'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
So I echo that as well. There's a great deal of gratitude on our behalf to all of you that work on this every day. And it has been a complex year, 2 years now, with the federal funds that are coming in, and making sure that we remain in compliance is a yeoman's feat. So we certainly appreciate that. One question, the pension liability at 80.1, not quite as good as last year, but it's much better than it has been in the past. We've been in the 70s, haven't we? Do you recall, or do you know? 70 percentile, 77-ish?
I do not recall. I certainly go back and grab that history. I don't think we've been there since my time here. Could be wrong. But
wouldn't think so.
I'll look
It's not
that
that
up.
important. I just wanted to make that point, that it is getting better. Because that's certainly something we want to make sure that we don't get upside down too far on. So that was my only question. But again, thank you very much. And Ms. Wall, thank you for being here to present for the last time. And Ms. Dameron, again, I apologize for getting out of order. I hope that didn't mess you up too badly. So there is a motion required.
Yes, so I move that City Council accept the annual comprehensive financial report for the year ended June 30, 2021.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Takes us to item B, consideration and authorization for the city manager to review the maintenance contract for the Axon Officer Safety Plan 7 plus premium 10-year with a contract price of $123,000 annually. Chief Dunn.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of council. Thank you all for your consideration of our renewal of our Axon contract. As you know, the Axon contract, the Axon program includes our body-worn video, body-worn cameras, as well as our tasers, our less lethal weapon system. And this affords us to continue our program, which, again, we're at the 5th year mark here in December. And we're looking at doing that this time for a period of 10 years to lock in the pricing that we're able to achieve. I can't imagine being a police chief not having a body-worn camera system. There are just so many situations where there's so much scrutiny from the public, and having that real recording that the officers cannot alter of both audio and video it's really invaluable. And so with this contract, as we move forward, this allows us to upgrade our existing system and again, incorporate the latest technologies that are available to us. With this, just a couple of the highlights that I'd like to mention. With this new system, we will be able to live stream, say an officer is in a really precarious situation, an active shooter type situation, or maybe they're at a special event situation where the command wants greater situational awareness. With these cameras, we'll be able to live stream and see exactly what that officer is seeing at that moment. There's also additional officer accountability software, which I think is particularly important for us. One of the things that I'll speak to, but there are a number, but one is that we require our supervisors to just randomly select 2 videos per every officer per month to review. Every time there's a use of force report or some serious situation, that's automatically reviewed. And so this is in addition to that. This system has software built in so that supervisor will automatically get randomly selected videos from their officers to review, and with due dates on that so that we know that it's being done expeditiously as well. So we think that's a real neat thing. Probably the component that I'm most excited about, and I believe I've shared with you previously, is that there's a signal device that goes in the holster, so that should there be a situation where an officer, maybe it happens so quickly that an officer doesn't think to activate their body-worn video, now they'll have a system so as soon as they pull out their weapon from their holster, their camera will automatically start recording. And not just their camera, but anybody that's with, I believe, 15 yards camera will also start recording. And I think that's pretty incredible. You guys have seen around the country the situations where officers may have had video, but it wasn't recorded for whatever reason, and that places a lot of scrutiny on the agency for sure, as well as the officer. It also allows us to have virtual reality training. You may have heard of some of the old Imalo or some of the old systems that we would use for scenario-based training. Helps officers to use their verbal de-escalation skills and other types of conflict resolution skills in a controlled environment and with a dynamic environment, and we can change it as we go. This affords us that opportunity through virtual reality. And so no longer do we need any sort of infrastructure in the room. We can use any 10 by 10 space. And with this device that the employee wears, we can use either canned scenarios or we can create our own scenarios to have it so that we really can customize training, scenario-based training for the Williamsburg Police Department, which we think is really great. In fact, this allows us to remove another CIP request that we had for this specific project as we upgrade with this particular contract. And then we have Redaction Assistance. Ms. Shelton, Major Jandrup, and others would tell you the Commonwealth Attorney's Office when they need to redact video. For instance, maybe there's a video that we want to put out to our community of a robbery at a convenience store, and there are witnesses who aren't involved whose faces are in that video. It's particularly cumbersome for us now being able to put that video out without putting the witness video images out. This allows us to kind of blur those faces or blur tags or whatever it is that we may want to blur, and then allows us to go through that entire video with that particular person or that particular image blurred. So it saves a lot of time. There are other features with the redaction, but I think that's one worth noting. This contract allows us to replace our body-worn cameras every 2.5 years. And so every 2.5 years, we're getting the latest and greatest technology. And as you know, it's changing very quickly, right? And then the tasers will be renewed every 5 years. So again, every 5 years, we get a brand new taser with the latest and greatest technology. The cost is $123,000 per year. And again, we could have gone with a 5-year or a 10-year, but we felt like, seeing how these costs are escalating, we felt like it would be appropriate to go with a 10-year contract. In fact, I feel very fortunate that Taser's allowing us to lock it in at that rate for 10 years. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
So just a quick question. So is that for both the lethal and non-lethal weapons that the cameras will come on?
Yeah, well, so that's a great question. So when you remove your firearm from your holster, it automatically starts recording. When you activate your taser, so when you turn it on, there's a system there. It's in the holster, but it's off. So not just removing it from the holster, but turning it on automatically starts the recording. And just like I shared with the sidearm, anyone who's coming to that scene, once they get within about 15 yards, their camera will also automatically start recording. Great question.
Thank you, Chief Dunn. And obviously you described a tremendous amount of technology out there. Are there many vendors who offer the level of technology or
Sure. Great question.
that this company offers?
Yeah, that's a great question, and in my opinion, no. I mean, this is head and shoulders above anything else that's out there. And I don't know that there's a weapon system out there that I could even say is comparable to the Taser system.
Yeah, and I think that's important to point out that it's the top of the line system to protect everyone involved. And then just a second question, without getting into too much legal. So, the police department remains the custodian of the records when it comes to videos, or is that something the vendor?
So with this package, it allows us to save the video in their cloud, right, if you will, but there are videos. It's our data, and so they hold it for us, but it's ours. They're not going to release it without our okay or our approval.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chief. A couple questions. In terms of the video viewing, especially with the Commonwealth's attorney, are there any added features that you mentioned, the tagging, that help them speed up that process?
Well, I mean, I guess to that I'll say it's a shared system with our Commonwealth Attorney's Office, and all of our partners, as far as I know, that work with our Commonwealth Attorney are using the same system. And so it makes it a lot easier for our Commonwealth Attorney to be able to access, our system and with a product that he's very used to, very comfortable with. I'm sure he's going to be very pleased with this upgraded contract.
And when you're talking about it's activating anybody who's responding to the scene, is that true with mutual aid with our other jurisdictions?
Yes. Our partners who have this system, who have this capability, this technology, will also be able to do that with us.
And is that another advantage with going with this company because the others do?
I don't know another company that would afford us that opportunity. Okay. Yeah. So, Exxon really is the leader, without a doubt.
In terms of, and is this integrated with, what about turning on your lights and siren and dash cam? Is that all integrated?
Yeah, excellent question. Maybe I should have backed up a little bit further. Yeah, with our existing system, anytime our officers activate their lights, not only is their in-car camera going to automatically start recording, assuming it's an Axon in-car camera system, most of them are not, but if it is, it will. We're transitioning in that direction. But also the body-worn video will begin recording.
Yeah.
Excellent. And certainly at certain speeds, there are other things that can trigger that. But yeah, excellent question.
Now, I mean, up until recently, we might not have thought of this as a technology need, though. Is there anything that when the officer pulls his or her weapon versus the non-lethal weapon that's reminding that officer that he's got the lethal weapon versus the non-lethal weapon?
No, we intentionally holster our weapons on our strong side and our tasers on our weak side for the purpose of trying to prevent that confusion. But I'm not familiar with a technology that might somehow alert the officer that I mean, you know what, probably at some point in my career that'll be available, but not that I'm aware of at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you for all of the details. We had heard that this was a Cadillac system, and I think you have delineated reasons why it's described as that in that level. You mentioned that there would be cost savings by doing a 10-year contract because we would tie in the price for the next 10 years. What kind of increases have we seen over the past 5 years? Perhaps in a percentage-wise?
Well, that's a great question. I can give you the numbers. Barbara maybe could break this into percentages for us real quick, but I'm not that good, right? We were previously paying about $112,000 per year. We had actually, the quote that we got, the information that we got, was actually going to move us up to $132,000 per year. Through a lot of work of some of my staff working with the vendor, we were able to get it to $123,000 a year. But I'm under the impression that similarly sized departments doing a renewal like this, their number would actually be more like 132. So from 112 to 132 in 5 years. And I think the demand from communities to go to this sort of technology is causing this technology to get better, I think, but also the price is just going to continue to go up. So I think it's real value for us being able to lock in that rate for 10 years.
Right, and I agree with you that I think the need for this type of information will only increase as we go forward. So,
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the presentation, Chief Dunn. You certainly lead your department with a lot of accountability, whether it's through the Neighborhood Resource Officer Program or the CALIA accreditation. So I know that Axon plays a role in that in some of its smart technology. A couple of my other questions have already been touched on. One I was curious about is, in a situation that might not be at its impetus, potential for a use of force, maybe the response to a mental health episode or a checkup on someone who is, a primary care physician has asked the department to check in on them. What is a policy in place or a use of this sort of technology, the body cam tech, to film that in case it would need to be reviewed at a later date?
So if I understand your question, so, any of those types of responses that our officers make, I mean, they're required to record it, right? Absolutely required to record it. And we find ourselves in a situation where we've gone to a call, mental health or otherwise, and maybe someone needs to be taken into custody, meaning they're in handcuffs, they're in the back of the police car, and whether it's they're going to the hospital or the jail or wherever, assuming there is no what we would consider force, right? So the person's compliant. I mean, they understand, if they're going to the hospital, we're trying to get them well, but under the circumstances, maybe they need to be secure in the back of the police car. In those circumstances, that would fall into that category that I was referring to, where the system now is going to randomly select a couple of those, where the supervisors weren't automatically going to do a review, right? And so then the other bucket is if there was a force report completed. So, for instance, whatever the situation is, maybe the person was unruly, combative, maybe assaulted the officer, and so then the officer maybe had to use, whether it's just their hands, but a little bit harder of their hands, right? Not just gently escorting someone, or some other level of force. Then that's going to require, in addition to the incident report or whatever other paperwork may be required, That's also going to require a use of force report, and that use of force report, as well as the review of the video, starts with that, and the officer does it. Any other witness officers that were there also do it, and then that goes to the sergeant, to the lieutenant, to the major, ultimately to the deputy chief, and then to me. And so with every situation where we've used force in the department, I am personally reviewing that. So I hope that answers your question.
It does.
Okay.
It was just in those situations in which a weapon might not be drawn, the curiosity was exactly how much is that body cam being used? And
Yeah,
the answer
yeah.
was frequently, especially in those situations where it would need be.
I like to use the example, if an officer's at 7-Eleven drinking a cup of coffee, talking to a citizen about Williamsburg or directions to someplace, they don't have to record that. But if it's a situation where somebody's called 911 or we've responded to some sort of police situation, that body-worn camera needs to be activated, needs to be recording.
All right, well, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you.
Well, as Ms. Ramsey pointed out, this is the Cadillac plan. It's an expensive plan. Cost of software is getting higher, but in my mind, it's something that we should spend the money on. Provides accountability not only to our officers but to our citizens, and gives everyone the protection they need. When it comes down to whatever the matter may be, whether it goes to court or not, but just in terms of safety, I think it's an appropriate action that council enters into this contract. So I applaud you for finding the software and the system that works best for our department and lead us into the future.
Thank you very much.
So I move that City Council authorize the city manager to sign the maintenance contract with Axon Officer Safety Plan 7+ Premium, 10-year, with a contract price of $123,000 annually.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
I'm going to hold off on item C on our new business and move on to item 9 on the agenda, which is the open forum. If anybody would like to come forward and speak to any matter, please come forward and do so. Braxton? Nothing? Okay. Seeing none, I'll close that open forum, and I believe we have a matter for a closed session.
I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one property matter per subparagraph 3 regarding acquisition of property for the police station relocation, of which discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect bargaining or negotiating strategy of public body.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, we'll go into closed session and return here in a few minutes.
I move to approve the certification of a closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3712 of the Code of Virginia.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey? Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, so we'll go back to items for new business, and would be item C, the purchase of a portion of 715 Lafayette Street for a police station project. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, as you all know, we've been working for some time to try and acquire some additional property so that we could relocate some public works facilities, which would free up space on the municipal campus to build our new police station. And I'm pleased to announce that we've reached agreement with the family that owns the property adjacent, and we've recommended to the City Council that we proceed with the purchase contract with the hope to close by the end of the year.
Questions for the city manager?
No.
Questions? Well, and so, I think it's a strategic parcel for the city to purchase, and it provides us to expand our municipal complex, making room for the police station, realigning some stuff. And so I think it really is a good decision to make. I'm pleased that the family that owns it has agreed to sell. Excited for the opportunity.
Yes, so I move that City Council approve the purchase of a portion of 715 Lafayette Street from C.C. Casey & Sons, LLC, for a purchase price of $700,000, and authorize the city manager to execute a contract for purchase and all necessary closing documents.
Second.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
I believe we have another item on the agenda for reappointments, boards and commissions.
Yes, so I move to reappoint James Boswell to the Planning Commission for a term to begin January 1, 2022, and expire on December 31, 2025, and that Reed Nestor be reappointed to the Historic Bicycle Advisory Committee for a term to begin January 1, 2022, and expire on December 31, 2024.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Okay, so there is no other business to be had. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So I move that City Council adjourn.
Second?
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
You're adjourned.